from the Hayti Heritage Center today here in Durham, North Carolina. And of course, it's the World Edition. And yours truly could probably play the role of Santa Claus. But the reason I'm at the Hayti today and probably will be here the rest of the week is because there are actually folks coming here to see Black Santa. That's right. Black Santa is here taking pictures with the kids. As a matter of fact, I'm actually watching some of the kids come in and check in so they can take pictures with Santa Claus and all in that space. So that is one of the things going on in my life today and going on this week. So there's already the kids starting to roll into the building and looking forward to taking pictures with Santa. The elves have already arrived and they were already setting up the space and all in that way. And I believe Santa Claus is already here as well. So it'll be interesting to see how much the kids enjoy this experience and what is going on in their life with that. So that is one of the things that are taking place here in Durham, North Carolina. But in terms of world events, we've got a couple of world events. And of course, I've got my great experts that'll be joining me as well. And we'll have a discussion around some of the things in the news. One of the things that I saw was that a once in a generation winter storm is going to impact nearly every state. So that looks like that's getting ready to come down the pike. So I guess we're getting ready to have some winter weather throughout this area. And maybe Chris will have some thoughts about that as he is the data man. And I'll bring up some other data around that. And apparently, the IRS has failed to conduct timely mandatory audits of Trump's taxes while he was the president. And I'm going like, wait a minute. I know a lot of folks that are just regular citizens that wish that the IRS would do that on a regular basis with them, just kind of like not do those timely audits and do the other things, because we know that sometimes the common citizens don't get those same kind of graces that some of the politicians get as well. And speaking of politicians, Zelensky is going to meet with Biden in Washington and address Congress. So that's coming up as well. So the gentleman that is doing the leading the fight with Ukraine as they fight against Russia will be coming to the U.S. to meet with Biden and to also address the Congress and all along those lines. So that's some of the news stories that I saw. I'm sure that I'll get to some other ones as we get further into what's happening in the world and all along those lines. But those were some of the immediate things that I saw. Oh, I did see another one that involved some of the things we've talked about in the sense of horrible crimes that go on. But apparently 18 girls met online, then killed a 59-year-old man in what was called a swarming. And that was over there in Canada. So that is something that was going on. And you have to wonder how much social media played in that particular story and all along those lines. But getting to bring in my folks and see what they've got to say about the few items that I brought up. And I know that Chris has got some items that he wants to bring up as well. And of course, we've got Dan Worthington and Lee Newton Rhodes with us as well. So first up, I'll definitely bring in Chris, because Chris was the first one in the building. And I know he's got some stories that he wanted to talk about and all in that space. And of course, I'm going to bring in Dan Worthington as well as Lee Newton Rhodes and all along those lines. So glad to see all of you gentlemen with me here today. Like I said, there is apparently a major winter storm coming, even though the temperature is supposed to go up 8 degrees from what it was yesterday here in Durham, North Carolina. But that doesn't mean that the winter weather isn't coming. And like I said, the elves were here earlier setting up and all in that space. Hey, Chris, I've been trying to find those reindeer. I really want to go on a reindeer ride, but if they got to park, they got to park somewhere hidden. So I've not been able to find them. But if I find them, I might try to go on a reindeer joyride, but I've not found those reindeer yet.
Mark, you saying some of America is going to have a white Christmas?
It sounds like there might be that coming your way and everything. So I'm going to look up exactly when it's supposed to hit. But they said actually the news story I saw said it was going to be the majority of America. So it might be a lot of us getting some winter weather, but I'll find that out and we'll see the exact details of how much of this area is supposed to get hit. But it does look like a lot's going to be going on in that space. So we'll have to find out what happens. And speaking of things happening, while I look that up, the other thing that I saw that I forgot to get to is that the Taliban has apparently banned women from universities, and they're getting all kinds of condemnation for that. So the Taliban over there in Afghanistan have said women going to universities not happening anymore, and all in that space.
Yeah. That's well. That was Dan. I think you and I, and even Lee, and we can pretty much assume that the Taliban was going to do that sooner or later. I think that was the Sharia law thing coming into play. It's funny how Iran got rid of the Hajib police. The the religious police, but that hasn't stopped them from arresting people or cutting off their heads or doing whatever they need to do. So hey, it's their country. If people want to go to Iran, have at it. I have to tell you, though, I took a look at the World Factbook, the CIA World Factbook, and it's interesting to note that not many people are migrating to Iran. I just thought I'd throw that out there. It's a negative migration. So there's not many people fleeing to Iran. But so anyways, I wanted to bring up these two areas because I know that Shaquille's not here, so I got to bring up Rice, right? So I got to bring up race. There's two instances of race-related stuff that I think you'll enjoy, Mark. First of all, a couple of days ago, you talked about France and about how France was just this open country, so not racist, so open and just, if you're black, please come here because France will just love you. Interesting to note that NPR Radio had a story on, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where they talked to a French person, doctor of counseling or whatever the hell it was, and she talked about how when the French team lost, that they excoriated the black players, said that they ought to go back to Africa, that they lost because of the black players, because that these people were not real French people and they used the N-word and they used whatever type of words. Now these were French people, Mark. They're so open-minded. I want to know if the U.S. players, when they lost, did we excoriate the black players on that team? Because I just want to make sure that we understand who's the racist country here and who talks about that. Second of all, is that the UK, Rishi Sunak, who's, according to Steve Rao, is Indian, which is interesting because I don't understand how that all works. But anyways, him and his government, the Home Secretary, has decided that they're going to take the migrants that are coming over from the Channel and they are going to deport them to Rwanda. And they're going to they just gave 140 million euros to Rwanda to send these people that have migrated across the Channel. They're going to send them to Rwanda, and they are in a partnership with Rwanda. Now, Mark, I'd like to understand this. Does this include European migrants coming over, or is this just people of color? I just want to make sure that we understand the countries here and their non-racist attitude. And matter of fact, and to throw back, and I please let the Baltimore Ravens fans come at me because I'm all for it. When they were over in England and they were over in the UK, they knelt for the American national anthem, but they stood and put their hand on their heart for the British national anthem. The British are more racist than we are. But no, that's okay because America has got all kind of problems. And why would anybody want to stay here? I say let them get into a boat, go over to UK, and then go to Rwanda because that's where they're going to go. And Rwanda right now is having all kind of problems with Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, because the Rwandans have the M23 rebels, which are going across the border and attacking Congo on the eastern side of that area, and they're having all kind of issues that you can find out more about that on my program Worldview, where I talk about that. So those are the two major stories that I wanted to talk about because everyone's talking about Trump this, Trump that, blah 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 blah, all this bull crap about Trump, and yet here's the UK doing racist stuff. Here is France doing racist stuff. But yet, for whatever reason, America is still the most racist country. So I'd like to just throw that crap out there and
Chris, you know why?
Hit the fan.
Do you know why America is the most racist country?
I please tell me.
Because we have the resources to come after. Follow the money. That's just my philosophy. Follow the money.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing.
But there's been accusations of racism in many countries. That's why there's the whole conversation around imperialism. And most of those countries you named were actually colonial and other kind of countries, whether it was England, whether it was France, or whether it's a number of other ones. So definitely the conversation
Netherlands.
around race relations has existed in the world for a number of decades and even centuries and all in that space. So it is not a new conversation. And actually, some of those people in those countries actually have regular conversations around race relations in their countries. I know there was a whole race relations conversation in England. There was a whole race relations conversation in Germany. There was a whole race relations conversation in a number of places and all of those lines. And yes, I was teasing you when you were not here yesterday because I knew that you were just jumping up for joy when you saw that France went down in defeat in the World Cup.
Oh, by the way, just to state that Argentina and France do have buddy aspects. Is that when the Falklands happened and the UK was trying to take the Falklands, the French were selling missiles to the Argentinians, who then used them and destroyed the USS Royal Battleship Sheffield, with an Exocet missile bought from France. So yeah, I mean, and Britain still tries to do this crap with Europe. It's like the French don't want anything to do with anybody but themselves. And this is the deal. And I loved Macron. Macron went to the finals with Argentina, and I said, oh, please lose, so Macron can put his head down and he can go back to Paris where he belongs. And just go back to Paris and just put your head underneath a pillow and cry, buddy, because France lost that. I was so happy. I was messy.
It sounds.
That's what Macron is, a French dip. A French dip.
A French dip. Yeah.
I like that. Hey, Lee, just to answer your question about the white Christmas, that I did find it and everything. A strengthening major winter storm, I said white storm, but a winter storm will bring more than a foot of snow and possible blizzard conditions to the Midwest, as the National Weather Service warns of life-threatening wind chills for millions. The storm and cold blast will impact nearly every state and bring what the Weather Service is calling a once-in-a-generation type event that will cripple travel on some of the busiest travel days of the year. There are more than 90 million people under winter weather alerts and more than 87 million people under wind chill alerts. The alerts stretch across 37 states, dipping as far south as the Texas-Mexico border. So the cold is going to stick around for Christmas weekend, making this the coldest Christmas in roughly 40 years for portions of the plains and the Midwest.
I have a question, Mark.
Yes.
Is snow racist?
No, snow is not racist, but
snow falls on everybody. Yeah,
snow falls on everybody. It's not racist whatsoever, and it has some very. Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking everything. No,
there's definitely a white privilege when they go skiing on white snow.
Well,
they don't have black patch.
And there's like whole black ski groups that go on those ski trips. So there are the entire black ski groups that go on ski trips, even though that is not a sport or a hobby that is exactly the popular one within the African American community. But there are folks that go on those skiing trips to Denver, Colorado, and to other places along those lines. But there is a real thing called environmental racism, and yes, that does exist when certain areas of certain communities are impacted or are targeted because of where they are located. So yes, I do believe in environmental racism. Maybe everybody else here on the panel does not, but I grew up in Warrenton, North Carolina, which was actually the founders of that whole notion, and it was both a class and a race thing because they chose to dump in a poor area that was also predominantly minority.
Right.
And the same thing can be said around Detroit, where there has been some things that happen in certain communities that are poor and also minority. So I do think that there are sometimes that things happen that are targeted for certain groups and that have some environmental.
I think the reason that is, Mark, is because a lot of the aspect about that is powerlessness, right? So when you do in a poor community, the people don't have the resources, as Lee was brought up, the people don't have the resources to be able to fight that stuff. So, basically it's like, if you don't have the resources to fight, then you're not going to fight that, dumping or whatever it is, what's going on with that area.
It's also corporate greed, because like I said, in corporate greed can be across the board and everything. One of the things that I said, I'm at HI today, and literally this was a historical Black Wall Street area, and there's a highway, and don't get me wrong, I love going on the highway. The bus goes on the highway and other things go on the highway. So it is a mean of getting back and forth. And I'm not knocking the highway, but at the time of constructing the highway, there was a very burgeoning African-American community, and the powers that be at the Department of Transportation decided that, hey, if we were going to sacrifice something, why not sacrifice that? And there were people within that community, because yes, you can have your own folks in your own community can be just as guilty as well. So they saw a chance to make some quick bucks and everything. So there's a notion of people selling out their community, and that is what a lot of folks felt was done in this particular community. There were some well-off and well-to-do people that sold them out.
Okay, Dan, you make a good point about you made a good point about snow being white. I would stay away from yellow snow personally.
I would too.
Yeah, that yellow snow, that's probably had some stuff on it that you don't want to have. You know, I don't know how y'all feel, since we're talking about snow and this is a news story, but we can have fun as well. I don't know how y'all feel about snow cream, but I used to love snow cream as a child. But, you know, as you get older, you start wondering, you know, who stepped in that snow, who's done what else in the snow, what animals have done stuff in the snow. So unless you're going to find some way to disinfect the snow cream, while it can sound like it would be wonderful because it's snow ice cream and all of that, it can also be chancy, but I'll just put it that way.
I'll stick with my snow cones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even the water. I mean, even water to make ice with is kind of like, what are we really saying here? I mean, so it's that type of thing. I wanted to throw up a study that was done. Lee and I talked about this earlier, but on the share screen, I have a study that was done by the Commonwealth Fund, which is by virtue of, it is left-leaning, but interestingly enough, this is December 13th. It says 2 years of U.S. COVID-19 vaccines have prevented millions of hospitalizations and deaths. And I did an entire data show on this. This is called unfalsifiability, which means you cannot prove this to be false. There's no way you can prove it to be false. I mean, you can't go out there and say, no, it didn't, because it's like, well, prove this wrong. You can't prove it wrong, because the computer modeling that they did to show this is basically what they call counterfactual. And they go through all the background and everything else. But what I wanted to show you was this chart right here, which is basically this, is that, hey, this is the reported incidence of issues with COVID-19. And then this blue line is what they call counterfactual, which is actually misspelled. It's supposed to be counterfactual without vaccination. And basically fairy tale, because this is not done. And the problem is people believe this. And I'll tell you what's going to happen is that politically, the Democrats are going to throw this up and say, see what vaccinations have done? Look how many lives they've saved. Look at this. They've saved millions of lives over that period of time. You know, and all it did was basically the computer modeling. You can see the curve here. You can see the curve here, and you can see the curve here. All it did was it just basically expanded those curves. That's what it did. It just expanded the entire thing to show that, oh yeah, you know, we look at and there's going to be two things that are going to happen when the Republicans take Congress. One is they're going to throw this out there, which, by the way, this is not a valid study. I'm going to tell you right now, and they can come after me on this. Please come after me on this, please, because I would love to show that, hey, if we didn't fight World War II, hey, if the Russians would have invaded Ukraine, hey, if this would have happened, look how many lives we could have saved. Look how many, all that crap. So this is what's happening here. That's number one, is that they're going to throw that out there. And number two is the minute the Republicans take Congress, and they're already getting ready for this, is they're going to say we're in a recession. We've been in a recession, but they're going to say, no, we weren't really in a recession. We're going to be in a recession come January of 2023, and that's when we're going to be in a recession, and it's the Republicans' fault. And they're going to throw that right out there. That look at all the millions of lives we saved as Democrats while we were in office, and look at the fact that we were not in a recession that entire time. Now, there's two things they've done during this time frame. One is they've done the Inflation Reduction Act, which is like saying jumbo shrimp. And the second one is like saying the Respect for Marriage Act, which is a bunch of bull crap, because it has no more respect for marriage than the man in the moon. So both those things are mistitled, And this is just part of what this data stuff is supposed to have it.
Chris, you brought up a valid point. I brought it up a couple times on this show as well as other shows, whether it's respect for marriage, whether it's law and order, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's a number of other things that are catchphrases, wonderful slogans, and all of that. Don't you get tired? And I'd love to hear from everybody else on the panel about the sloganism that exists in the United States and how a lot of these slogans are totally misrepresentative of what the people are wanting. And in some cases, I think that they don't even necessarily want what they say they want within the title. I've oftentimes said that I think most of the people that are about defunding the police actually just want police refund, but somebody had the bright idea to call it defund the police and all of that. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that don't want to defund the police within those movements, but I think the vast majority just want to have police reform and have some police accountability. But I just love, and it's on both the right and the left. Y'all know I love that phrase, right and left, but I find it is on both sides that there's a whole lot of sloganism that exists that has no real merit on what the issues are and have any real clout. But I'd love to hear y'all's take on that and whether y'all agree with me that we need to get away from this sloganism.
I just think people should start speaking how they feel.
I mean,
for what comes out of their mouth.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, basically what's happening is that.
Would you say?
Chris? No, there are people who feel like that, and other people, they piggyback on it, not fully understanding it. But there are people who have those warped views of reality.
No, I would agree with that, but I just think the vast majority of them are not those that are using the terms. I found quite a few.
But once they use the term, they're responsible for it.
Oh yeah, I'm just waiting.
Don't plead ignorance.
But I mean,
what I should think next.
But just along those lines, I mean, there is a very popular phrase. I'm not going to lie and say that I haven't even chanted it and everything, but it is a chant that you will hear many times on the protest and everything that is a non-factual chant in my mind because, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but the streets are actually owned by states and federal agencies, if I understand the interstate highways and all of that. Am I not correct?
Well, there are interstate highways, you're right, that are federally controlled. And then there are state highways that are state controlled. And the thing is that federal money can go to those state controlled highways. But basically, yeah, I mean, interstate, what they call interstate highways, 80, 81, 83, 80, all these different, 85, 95, all those areas are interstate.
Right. But most streets are not private, right?
No, most streets are not private, not even in communities. That's right.
Not even in communities. But one of the most popular chants that you heard for the last 10 years, I think I even heard it I definitely heard from some left organizations, but I've also heard it sometimes from right organizations as well as also is "Who streets my streets?" So that is factually not correct because they're not their streets.
We pay taxes. So if we pay taxes for the upkeep and maintenance of those streets, then technically speaking, it is our streets. But we as a community, and it's really, Mark, it's our community streets. It's our community streets. And I wanted to point out, something else I saw is that Biden went to the Hanukkah celebration and talked about anti-Semitism. And I just want to make sure that you understand. Most anti-Semitic, the most anti-Semitic group in the nation is the Nation of Islam. That is the number one anti-Semitic group in this country. And it is in almost all 50 states. So it's I just point that out very, very succinctly is that in the Southern Poverty Law Center, they have a study, and you brought it up, Mark. I've brought it up, and they have a map, and they depict all these different hate groups in the United States. And the Nation of Islam is considered to be a major anti-Semitic group. Now, there are other anti-Semitic groups that are located, some here right here in North Carolina.
I'm sorry,
but
considered
Nation
by
of
who?
Islam, big deal. Huh?
Well, I'm sorry, considered by who? Where'd you get that data from? Or that
the Southern Poverty Law Center has a
the Nation of Islam.
The Nation of Islam is anti-Semitic, which is interesting because they're basically like a Black Power movement type aspect. But they're very, very, very anti-Semitic. They have that. I mean, Louis Farrakhan, when he was in charge or whatever else, was very big on that.
Yeah, and that's why you say there's a whole, because we can get into a whole semantics talk about the Muslim community and things of that nature, because just like any other community, just like the Christian community, the Muslim community is also fairly divided. I mean, if you look at the historical Mid-East, you will see the Sunnis and the Shiites. Even within what you're talking about, there is those that practice under Elijah Muhammad, and there are those that practice, and his son, who I believe is Deen Muhammad or something along those lines, and those that practice under Farrakhan. And of course, there was all kinds of conversations around Malcolm X and some of the history around Malcolm X and some of the divisions that took place within that as well. So like any other religious group, it is very divided. And yes, there are some extreme parts of that organization that have some very extreme views. I mean, shucks, some of those views include like some thoughts around alien travel and things. So that whether whether that is true or not is a whole other matter. But there are some of those views that some of those groups hold, just like there are some people in Denver that hold views about the airport there in Denver, and whether that has a whole Illuminati world order kind of crowd or not. So there's all kinds
I have the map up on my share screen. We can take a look at it. And so interestingly enough, it has all the different hate groups in that area. But it's funny because it says in 2021 we tracked 61 anti-Semitism hate groups across the U.S. Well, if you go back to 2015, there's 0. Now, Mark, you know daggum well, there was not 0. I mean, there was still. I mean, if you go back all the way back here, there was 0. So you're telling me I wonder when they started. They started even in 2017. There was nothing. So I mean, this data is relatively, it wasn't until 2021 all of a sudden we tracked 61. So the 61 anti-Semitic groups have. And in fact, it's kind of sad here in North Carolina, right within probably 5 miles of where I'm talking from. There's a house, and the house is basically a Ku Klux Klan's got to be some type of wizard or whatever else. He's got a KKK flag up. Now, nobody knows. You probably, there are people that probably know on this group what a KKK flag looks like. It doesn't have KKK on it. It doesn't have white on it, whatever else. It looks like a state flag, but it's not a state flag. It's basically the KKK flag. And finally, and this is right across from a school,
Well, Chris, you raised a couple of interesting questions and everything, and I'll bring up both of them in this whole conversation. One is that when you think of anti-Semitic, well, one is because of different things that have happened in the world, like around the Israel and Palestine conversation and a number of other things, and whether those groups are strictly anti-Semitic, meaning that they are anti-Jewish. And actually my dad's involved and has been involved with years. Might as well call her my other mom, since they've been involved for 25 years with a Jewish woman from New York and all in that space. So are they actually anti-Semitic or are they anti-Zionist? Because I know some people that are definitely much pro-Jewish or even pro-Israel, but they're not exactly the biggest fans of some of the Zionist policies, which is more of that nationalism kind of policy that can
that's called ethnocentrism. Yeah, basically what happens is that, in other words, Jews before all others. I mean, it's that type of thing. It's the same thing as the hate groups that are against the Jews. It's Christianity before all others.
This is Mark's statement right now. Is there really a difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Jewish?
I would think so. I mean, can you?
Yes. I mean, Zionism unto itself is very ethnocentric, Lee. I mean,
I understand your point, but my point is more often than not, when you see groups coming out, at least in America, against Israel, they'll single out Israel versus any other country for the same reasoning, and frequently they'll, like in New York, there was an incident in the city council. They started, I think it was a flag or whatever, someone there. When they were doing nothing to do with Israel, they started screaming in terms of Palestine. Someone says, what's that have to do with what we're talking about? We're talking about, this is a Jewish issue, not an Israeli issue.
Well, when you talk about Zionism, Lee, I mean, we talk about the movement against racism, right? If you talk about, and Judaism is the religious faith. Zionism is the move against racism. Okay.
I understand the distinction, but frequently you'll see people who claim to be anti-Zionist and condemn Israel when reality is they're cloaking it because it's an anti-Semitic argument that they're making. Because they'll single out Israel or they'll bring
Oh,
it up.
I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
They'll bring up Israel when they're not even talking about Israel. It's a Jewish issue they're talking about.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying, but part of that is around the state rights and the rights of the Palestinians to have their own state and all of that. So I don't know that that's necessarily
No,
anti-Semitic.
I understand exactly, Mark. So they'll bring that issue up when they're talking about Hanukkah, for example. Well, what does one have to do with the other?
Yeah, I think what happens is that people naturally have that the Zionism has to do with Israel, that Judaism has to do with the faith. So I mean, it's the idea that Israel has been an independent.
So often.
Yeah, well, it's the independent. Israel's been independent since 1948. So basically, they are an independent nation. And what's happened is, and it's interesting because, and now Sasha's on, he can comment on this too. The Ukraine, was a home for a lot of Holocaust camps, but that is history. That is done. Ukraine right now is asking Israel for help for to try to go against the Iranians that are providing the drones through Russia and attacking basically the infrastructure of Ukraine. And Israel, I think, is softening on that. And I'll tell you something, I don't know for sure, but I will bet you any money at this point in time, excuse me, that Israel is providing either intelligence aid or some type of I don't know if they're providing arms per se, but they're certainly providing advisors and whatever else through the Mossad to help Ukraine to try to take on Russia. Now, I'll tell you what's happening is that this whole situation with Ukraine is becoming a very, very hot button issue in Congress. And there has been some conspiracy theorists that state that the money that is being given to Ukraine is not going to Ukraine. It's actually going to Zelensky, and Zelensky is taking the money and putting it in a Swiss bank account. And this is, the Ukrainians, this has got to really hurt them. Emotionally, because they're trying like hell to beat these guys back. And if you put my share screen up, you can see they're doing a great job. At this point, they're in a stalemate with Russia because of the winter time is happening. But let me tell you something. Here's the blue is Ukraine. And they are making a lot of good inroads into already occupied Russian areas. So there's some real issues here. Odessa and the rest of those areas are they're taking a lot of hits. And what are the Russians doing? They're plastering Bakhmut and a couple other areas to try to encircle the forces around Kharkiv. But so they're destroying little villages so they can get these footholds in these areas. Zaporizhia and the rest of it. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. The Ukrainians have a strong foothold in these areas.
No one work at all. Coming back to, and I do want to enter something that Lee brought up, but I want to come to Ukraine first. Sasha, President Zelensky is actually going to meet with President Biden at the White House today and everything. And later he's supposed to deliver a primetime address to a joint session of Congress. Some folks are calling that a daring trip abroad, particularly since he's in the middle of this war and everything. And Karen Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, said 300 days ago, Russia launched a brutal assault against Ukraine. The visit will underscore the United States' steadfast commitment to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, including through the provision of economic, humanitarian, and military assistance. What are your thoughts about President Zelensky's visit? And do you think the U.S. is doing enough at this particular point to support what is going on there in the Ukraine?
Okay, let's compare two leaders. One, Zelensky is meeting President of the United States, Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. Another president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, he's visiting Belarus to meet dictator Lukashenko. How can you compare the fate of two countries and their leaders? Now, I would like to mention Chris, what you said earlier about the idea that Zelensky is putting a lot of money into his account. I think it would be very difficult to comprehend how Zelensky, who is fighting now for 300 days and he is never left Kiev and he is changing residences, although now probably not so, but still, I would like to have a real proof that this theory has any legs to stand on.
I mean, yeah, I agree, Sasha. This is totally ridiculous.
Okay, I wouldn't even repeat
No,
it,
it's not.
Chris, if I were you.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I even brought it up. Conspiracy bullcrap.
No,
It's
it's
a
not.
bullcrap. It's a
Yeah.
bullcrap completely.
No, it's
It
not.
could not happen even physically, even ideologically, not on any level. I will never agree to that unless there will be 100% proof of that. Please provide proof. Anybody
Yeah.
who's opening its mouth and saying, he put money, he put this and that. Proof right away. No proof? Shut up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, the bottom line on conspiracy theories is that, again, it's unfalsifiable, right? You can't sit there and say, "Well, that's wrong." Well, and to your point, Sasha, it's kind of like prove it right. Show the transactions. There's enough monetary oversight, especially with the EU and everything else, that they can see those transactions going back and forth and back and forth. So, I mean, it's
Chris, there might be a theory that it was all cash deal. So therefore, you cannot trace any money. But it was cash. So somebody was bringing bags of cash, and Zelensky took this cash and put somewhere. But where
yeah.
Gotta put it somewhere.
How?
Well, let me ask you a question. Another question about Lukashenko.
Things. Why would you do that? Are you listening to what's his name, Tucker Carlson? You're listening to this idiot and repeating what he's saying. It does not make any sense. Now,
Hey, Sasha.
Yeah.
Hey, Sasha, speaking of things that don't make any sense.
Corruption.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
No. I wanted to you talk about Lukashenko, and I agree. But what's going to happen? And I wanted to get your take on this since you've been talking to the guys in Kyiv. What's going to happen if Belarus puts troops along that northern border of Kyiv? If they put those troops along those northern border, I as an American, I'll tell you something. We've already learned what happened when troops were put on the west side. I would take American troops, NATO troops, and I would put them all along that border of Belarus. And I'd sit there and say, the minute you step over that line, we're going to just plaster the crap out of you. But what's going to happen? They're doing some training up in that area, up in the north, up by Brest and a couple other areas in Belarus. What's going to happen if the situation exists where Belarus suddenly puts a second front on those poor saps in Ukraine? What's going to happen at that point?
Well, there are two things. First, you mentioned reaction of NATO and US. That's one story. Second story is that Ukrainian army will how to just mince and just destroy Belarusian army.
Oh yeah, Belarus they don't have a strong military at all.
It's a matter of few hours. It's not. Actually, that will lead automatically to the end of Lukashenko regime, and he knows that. That's why he is resisting. Not that he loves Ukrainians, no, but he wants to be alive and stay in power. So the best way of him to achieve that, he cannot argue with Putin. So he is saying, oh yeah, okay, we are prepared. Okay, let's train our soldiers so they will be better prepared. And with each day, there could be what? Putin can actually pass away one day. You cannot exclude that outcome. He can be replaced with his own commanders and so on. So there are several scenarios. So Lukashenko knows how to play this game. Chris, something about I wanted to mention in your explanation about the Judaism and Zionism.
Yes, please.
Let me just elaborate a little.
I'm not an expert on that, so I don't.
What is Zionism and where did it start? Did Zionism exist 300 years ago? No.
Oh, easy. Yes.
Zionism
Yeah, I mean, Zionism was all about Israel. It was all about the idea that Israel was the chosen, that the Jews were the chosen people, that Israel was the covenant,
No, please. There was no such concept of 300 years ago and
Yeah, there
200 years ago.
Yeah, there was.
But something happened. No, something happened in the right on the
Nation of
border
Israel.
in 19, right at the beginning of 20th century, the end of 19th century, the beginning of 20th century. There was somebody actually he's hailing from Ukraine, philosopher
Herzog,
Zhabotinsky. That's his name.
Jabotinsky.
And another one is Herzl. These two people, based on their studies of the history of Jews, histories of religion and everything else, they came to the conclusion that the Jews who lived elsewhere, they lived in Russia and Poland and United States and just almost any country in the world, that the real home of the Jewish people is historical Israel, because obviously Israel didn't exist at that time.
Right.
So it was all Palestine.
Palestine, correct.
But
Yep.
somewhere where the Bible tells where and what happened, and they're mentioning all these cities of antique.
Pasha?
So they came to the conclusion that this is historical home of Israelis,
Right.
Jews, and it has to be such a home now. Okay, there is no country of Israel, so they have to first emigrate to Israel, or
Right.
former Israel, or future Israel, depends. And as long as more and more and more people will come, they will then put a question to League of Nations or England or whatever to have a home, historical home for Israel available to all Jews all over the world so they could live there. So the Zionism is slightly over 100 years old.
Sasha?
Now, Israel, yeah,
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Makes sense.
You're talking about the current state of Israel, not the desire for Jews to settle the land, which they've been there since the days of Abraham.
Wait, you're mixing me up. First of all, I started to say about when Zionism started. It was the
So
beginning.
that concept has been incorporated in the Bible, a yearning for Jews to live in the land of Zion.
Exactly.
It's Abraham.
But that before these two philosophers, Herzl and Jabotinsky, that issue was at the best muted. Nobody ever.
I'm not disagreeing with that from a state standpoint, but Jews lived there at the same time when it was before 47, before 1900 or 1800.
Well, they lived in
Samuel.
2,000 years ago. They lived there,
Yeah,
but then
Since then,
once Romans defeated Israel at I think it was the year 70.
correct?
Christ, okay.
I believe you're correct.
So when they were defeated, they were dispersed all around the world, and this actually led to the advent of Christianity, because inventors of Christianity are the Jews. The Jesus was a Jew. The Peter was a Jew. The Paul was a Jew.
Christianity are the Jews.
What they do, they spread the earlier. See,
How
Christianity.
How offensive is that?
How-
Sasha, that's offensive, what you just said.
You mean what? Why
Yes,
is it?
the inventors of Christianity are the Jews.
Well, it's
It is
historical
invented.
fact. Come on, Dan.
Christianity,
Dan, Jesus was Jewish.
you know,
It's historical
do
fact.
you know your
Nobody-
Old Testament at all? Do you know your Old Testament at all? Ever read Isaiah
Yeah,
about
Yeah.
the Messiah,
yeah.
about
Yeah.
the crucifixion, all that? It wasn't an invention. It's the Son of God. If you're going to offend all
Wait,
the Christians in the
wait.
world, then you
You're
keep at
mixing up something. There was time before Jesus was even born. Okay, at that time there was no Christianity. Do you believe
Yes,
that?
there was.
What-
Read
what
the prophets
was there?
in the Old Testament. You're lying about that. You don't know your Old Testament, and you're teaching false concepts. You may believe that.
It's okay. Listen, we are mixing two things. We are mixing
we're not.
history and religion. They're not the same, and
Yes,
they're two
the Bible is
different.
the oldest historic
I'm
document.
talking
in the world.
about history. I'm talking
Yes,
about
well, I am
history,
too.
not the
The Bible is
religion.
the oldest
The
historic
history is
document
very
in the world.
simple. There was a time before Jesus was born, and that
Yes, there
time
was.
the prevalent.
There
Oh my
were prophets. There were prophets in the.
I'm
in
talking
the-
about Jesus. Forget about your prophets. I'm
The
talking about
prophets
Jesus.
testified
Jesus
of
was
Jesus.
born in certain place, in certain day, in certain time. So
the
there was time
meridian
when
of
Jesus
time.
didn't exist. So by
Yes.
that time that Jesus
Actually,
didn't
Jesus
exist,
is the great
there
Jehovah,
was
the God
Israel.
of the Old
There,
Testament.
Dan, you make it so difficult.
No, I don't. It's the truth.
No, admit that there was a time in history as a fact that Jesus hasn't existed. There
Well,
was
Jesus
no person
was
like
born
Jesus Christ.
to the
Period.
world in the meridian of time. But he was the great Jehovah of the Old Testament. So he did exist, just as all of us existed prior to our birth. You don't believe that, so we
It's
can't
not
agree on
believing, it's a historical fact
Oh
that
my
there
God.
was a time that Jesus hasn't existed. Just
It
acknowledge
depends on
that.
who you.
No, you don't want to acknowledge. So
Are you
you're
talking
telling
about
me
Are you talking
you're
about
telling me
the
that
mortal
Jesus
Jesus?
existed before he was born? Come on,
Are
Dan.
you talking about the mortal Jesus, or
I'm
the
talking
Christ?
about Jesus Christ as a person.
Jesus
There,
Christ?
he
the
was
person
born, he
born in
lived his
Bethlehem,
life, and so on. I
the
don't
meridian of
deny
time.
that, but there was a
Agreed.
time
But
where
before
Jesus
that,
didn't
he was
exist.
the God of the Old
He
Testament.
was not
Great
born
Jehovah.
yet. That's
Still the
not
Son
his
of God.
fault. He was just
Name.
not born. That's
Okay,
why he
but
didn't exist until certain
we
date.
can
Okay, and we're
disagree.
all celebrating. All the world celebrates the birth of
Birth,
Jesus.
That's
Okay,
right.
so there
because
was
he came
something
to
before
die
he
for the
was
sins
born.
of mankind.
And that
right?
was a time when he was not, before he was born, he didn't exist. At
But
that
when
time,
he
the
existed,
prevalent and the only monotheist.
Sasha,
we all
Yes.
Sasha, I don't think Dan's arguing with you that the mortal didn't exist before the year zero,
Yeah.
before he was born. But I think what Dan is saying, if I'm correct, is the God that gave the Jews the Bible on Mount Sinai. Dan wants to say that was Jesus.
yeah. Then the God that
I don't think that's how the
Mount
Jews
Sinai.
understand it.
and the God of the Garden of Eden, the God the Father and the Son. The plan of salvation was developed before this world existed, that there would be a Savior to atone for the sins of the world. The garden story is all about that, Sasha.
No,
And
you're
so-
talking about the New Testament. The
I'm
New
talking
Testament
about the
is
Old
not
Testament.
the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, it's basically the only the Jewish teaching about the world, its existence, its birth, and it's talking about something what is a core of Judaism. Now,
Well,
the
it's also
Judaism,
the core of
Judaism
Christianity.
had many forms which were trying to deviate from the main teaching. There were Pharisees, there were Sadducees, and many others. And
That all happened after the death of the prophets. The last prophet
again,
was Malachi.
look,
And then after
look,
that,
Dan,
it was the
I'm not
Maccabees.
prepared to be involved in religious dispute.
Well, but this is
at all.
historical, like you said.
I can, but I refuse
I'm
to
telling
do
you about
so.
history.
I can discuss it only from the point of history, not
I
the
am
point of
too.
religion.
I'm talking about
Okay.
the history. My
So
God,
there is a history,
you don't know your
and
Bible.
there are facts. There are facts. When Jesus was born, we know all that. There was
You
a
don't
time
know your
before
Bible.
he was born, and before he was born,
Sorry.
there was at that time in that territory only one religion. It was a Judaism. And Judaism then later, with the great help of Peter and Paul, gave birth to Christianity. And Peter and Paul, they were the greatest inventors of Christianity, and they gave it to the whole world, including Romans, who adopted it in 308 or 312.
After they crucified both of them, right?
Oh, first they were crucifying, and all the first Christians who were crucified, they were all Jews. 100% of Jews
No, they
who were
weren't.
crucified
They
by
were-
Romans.
they
They
were
were
also
only
Greeks and
Jews.
Romans.
No, only Jews.
Yeah, no, they were
They were
converted Greek
crucified.
and Roman.
Romans
My
didn't
gosh, you
care
don't need to
about
know history.
this little thing.
You don't.
Romans had
You've
their
read
own
the New Testament
religion,
at all?
and they didn't care about Christianity until much later, 100, 200 years later.
Thessalonians
And
Ephesians
finally,
all that.
Rome adopted Christianity at much later date. At first, they were fighting Christianity and they were murdering all the adepts of Christianity.
So
I'm talking about from the point of history, not religion. I'm not
no.
prepared
So
to
you got
discuss
some of the
religious
things
issues.
right, but you don't have everything right. You leave out. Okay, first of all, Christianity exists at the time of the creation of the world.
Not true.
God
Without
the Father,
Christ,
and God
there
the
could
Son
not be Christianity.
created
Sorry.
the world. Okay.
Okay, you're going into religion. Okay, you can say
No,
anything.
I'm not. I mean, okay.
I'm
So
fine.
what's the oldest
okay.
book? What is the oldest book in history? It's the Bible. The Old Testament and the New Testament and you probably in the Book of Mormon, tell about the history of Christianity, and Christianity started from the beginning of time.
The Old Testament has no such word as Christianity, period.
The whole point of the Garden of Eden was to make it so that the atonement of humankind was necessary, that the Savior had to come into the world, be born as the Son of God physically on the earth, live, teach, atone, and die for the sins of mankind.
You read it in the Old Testament? Then
yes, it's in the Old Testament.
Really?
It's in the Old Testament. Go read Genesis. Okay, go read Genesis. My goodness, I mean, the whole thing is tied together. That's the point.
I hear y'all both points and everything, and we can get into a whole religious discussion, and maybe we'll have a show on religion at some point or another in the world's religions and all in that space. And actually, I've said several times that was actually one of my favorite shows that existed on one of the networks, because they found a lot of commonality between the religions and all in that space. But we've only got a few more minutes to go in all in those lines. So I was going to bring up a couple of other news stories really quickly and all in that way, and hear y'all's thoughts about one of them. I know that Sasha will probably have major thoughts about it as well, because apparently Trump paid $1.1 million in taxes during the presidency, but $0 in 2020, according to a latest report in that particular space. And another story that I saw that folks might be interested in is that researchers have found 168 new geoglyphs at Peru's Nazca lines, and all in those spaces. And last but not least, and I know that you'll love this one, Dan, the representative from North Carolina, Representative Dan Bishop, has highlighted a sinister feature in the omnibus bill released on Tuesday that allocates funds for reproductive health in areas where population growth threatens biodiversity. The massive $1.7 trillion bill was released earlier that day with the expectations that Congress will vote on it today. Several Republican figures, including Bishop, criticized the 4,200-page bill as more wasteful spending from the federal government passed without any clear knowledge of what's in the text, which we've been saying that a lot of people get this stuff and don't have no idea what's in the text. And Bishop documented many of his examples from his Twitter account, including over $500 million into reproductive health in places that could threaten endangered species. So he said, on a more sinister note, here's at least $570 million for family planning in areas where population growth threatens biodiversity. Mouse eugenicism is a disturbing anti-human ideology that should have zero place in any federal program, is what he tweeted, and all in that space. So I don't know your thoughts about this and whether maybe these congressmen need to actually read their bills.
Yeah, they really need to read what they're passing. A lot of this stuff ends up being foisted on the American people because it's hidden within the pages and recesses of these excessively ridiculous bills, and so much pork, so much ideology stuff that's passed that could never be passed otherwise. It's all a con, right? It's all a con.
Dan, didn't Nancy Pelosi say when Obamacare was being passed, you have to pass it before you could read it?
Yeah, that's what she said, because obviously Nancy is of that ilk, right?
Mark, that's totally irresponsible. They're not reading these things cover to cover, each page, each congressman that votes on these things. It's a contract with America that they're responsible for. They should be taking these things seriously.
they should definitely be taking these things seriously. I was going to bring up the video that you had also mentioned. I did load it and everything to we get back to the conversation around that as well. And then I had a question on with the video, but that'll get us toward the end of the show. But I will hear what was going on with this video that you gave us that addressed the whole concept of Zionism and some of the things that were going on in New York. So we're going to play that right now.
Thank you, Madam Public Advocate. You know, I've waited my turn here. I've followed protocol in the New York City Council and haven't spoken out because I respect this chamber. I have to tell you, you know, I'm still shaken to my core. I'm upset, I'm angry, but I'll tell you honestly, I'm actually somewhat pleased at what we saw here today. If you're wondering why I'm saying that is because for the last few weeks, we've heard from people who said, oh, we don't dislike Jews. We only dislike the state of Israel. We have no problem with you. We simply don't want you to go to Israel. But we know that's not really at the core of what they were saying, and today they proved it. While we were discussing a resolution regarding the murder of 1.1 million human beings, I will point out that 90% of whom were Jewish, but the other 10% were political dissidents, they were Jehovah's Witnesses, they were gays. Those were the people who were being killed together in Auschwitz-Birkenau. While we were discussing that, they had the nerve, the chutzpah, the temerity to unfurl a Palestinian flag and to yell at us while we were discussing that. And so the reason I'm pleased is because we can stop pretending that this is about Israel when the reality is that every Middle Eastern country that is in existence today is not democratic and persecutes people of other faiths and persecutes gays and persecutes people who disagree with them and persecutes people on Twitter and persecutes women who drive, except for one country, which is the state of Israel. And so what you saw here today was naked, blind, anti-Semitism. That's what you saw, and that's what you watched, and that's what you witnessed. People who are upset for one reason. Do you want to know why they're angry? Do you want to know why they're unfurling that flag today? Because Hitler did not finish the job. He only wiped out half of my family. And only by the grace of God is the other half, me, the grandchild, still alive today. That's why those people are upset. Shame on them. Shame on them for hating Jews. Shame on them for hating people. Shame on them for disrespecting the most diverse, democratically elected body in the United States of America. And that's why we go to Israel. We go to Israel to make a message that is clear that we will not be cowed by this fear and by this hatred that we have, where these are people who would celebrate the death of Jews rather than mourn the death of innocence. I am embarrassed at what happened here today, but I am pleased that we finally see what this is all about. Good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Councilmember Mealy.
Mark, thanks for playing that.
That's good.
Yeah,
Mark, you're muted.
very powerful statement, and it's hard to argue with that. By the way, I noticed I was watching the Soccer World Cup. I watched all games, and I watched in its entirety every move. And some games I watched more than once, especially final. Interesting thing is that when there were celebration for Morocco, the country, African country that first ever made it to semifinals, two things I've noticed. Number one is that African countries, instead of celebrating with Morocco, it's a great result, they were actually criticizing Morocco that this is imperialist country. It's colonized part of Western Sahara and wouldn't give it back to, I don't know, whoever they would have to give it back. And I'm not familiar with this history of colonization of Western Sahara by Morocco. I'm not aware of that. And another interesting thing is that in Morocco, when they were celebrating this great result, and they were waving the Palestinian flag, I thought, okay, what's a common as Morocco with Palestine and waving its flag? Well, actually, it's a view of all Arab world that the Palestine, which has its own territory and could develop a viable economy and build up the country. No, that's not what they want. And there is more than enough money in the Arab world to help them to do so. That's not what they're interested. They're interested to destroy the state of Israel, take it down to sea, destroy it completely, and then they will see what they're going to do with all this country and so on. So if that's the case, are you supporting that, Morocco? Are you waving the flag of Palestine to celebrate your victory in the World Cup? That doesn't make any sense to me.
You say it doesn't make any sense, Sasha, and we're actually winding down, but actually that's a whole conversation around Africa and the Middle East, because there are some people that would consider the Middle East separate from Africa, even though parts of the Middle East are in Africa, including Morocco. So there are some folks that definitely support the Palestinian freedom movement. I'm actually trying to get a friend of mine that is Palestinian to come on one of the shows. Maybe I'll even try to get her to come on the new show and everything to come
Mark,
and share some of the views around Palestine.
what is the Palestinian movement that so many people, and probably you as well, supporting? What exactly is that?
Independent state for Palestine. You can have it, but a separate.
There was a decision. There was a decision in 1948 when England abandoned its mandate. It was a decision to have two states. One is Israeli state, another Palestinian state. Is that correct?
There was a decision that was made during that time. Some people would argue the nature of the state, but there is not an independent Palestinian nation right now. And I hear what you're saying about Qatar and some of those others. And yes, they have some money, but right now they are. There are some capitalistic views within some of those states, and I'm not the biggest fan of Qatar or some of the Palestinian nations, including Saudi Arabia and things along those lines.
Answer my very simple question. My question was very simple. When
I'd have to go back and study the history.
There was a decision supported by United Nations and everything else that on that territory where British had their mandate, there will be two countries, two independent states. One is Israeli, one is Palestinian. Is that correct, or am I mixing something?
Like I said, my understanding that was not actually fully put into place, but I'm not going to answer a question that I don't know the answer to. So you're not going to bait me to answering a question that I don't have the facts
No,
for.
I was just talking about before the War of Independence in 40, I think it's 47 or 48. It was divided into two areas, Israel and then. Yeah.
But was that before the war? Did the war take place? There's a number of other factors that I don't know.
Because one side did not accept what the UN was saying.
Right. Was it one side or was it both sides?
No, it was one side. Israel was willing to accept much smaller borders than they have now.
And like I said, I would have to study that history and everything, but I'm not going to answer a question that I don't have the answers for and everything. I learned a long time ago.
I think I know Sasha didn't say this, but right now there is a motto. It's called "From the river to the sea" that many are chanting. It's not for a two-state solution.
No, I'm saying that the ones that I know are for a two-state solution. I can only speak for the people that are in my camp and the people that I talk to. They want a two-state solution. I mean, there are a lot of people in a lot of countries. There are people that don't want a two-state solution in between, say, Great Britain and Ireland and everything, because that's another country that had a great divide as well. And there are people on both sides. Both on Great Britain and Ireland, they were like both sides destroyed. So, I mean, that is the case in many wars and everything. But in my opinion, what I would like to see is a two-state solution.
Maybe we should do a show on this.
Before we finish our show, I just want to tell you one thing. A few years ago, I flew to Israel, and the last part of the trip is over the Mediterranean Sea, and the plane is approaching Israel, and you see the land. And from the height where the plane was, you can very clearly see that there is a part of land which is green, which are the flowers, which are the apples and the mandarins.
The farmland.
Everything is growing, and then you see Tel Aviv and all the skyscrapers and all the modern life on the right side. On the left side, when you see it from the plane, you see nothing. It's a desert. This is what a so-called Palestinian state or territory or whatever it is It's a desert. They're not doing anything. They're all preoccupied with the destruction of Israel. That's all what they care.
Right.
When they have for example, math lessons. So here is a math lessons in this so-called Palestinian territories. Okay, Ahmed, here is a problem to solve. Okay, before the lunch, you killed 2 Jews, and after lunch, you killed 3 Jews. How many Jews have you killed during the day? This is a math lessons in Palestine. That's
Not enough.
it's about.
That's what they believe.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, that's the philosophy that some people would say that people believe. I don't personally believe that, and I've had some conversations with some people from that country, including some that have been guests on the shows and everything. And like I said, I've talked to several that would love a 2-state solution. That are not trying to just massively destroy willy-nilly any Israel or any Jewish person of that faith. Like I said, I've got
The
Jewish
ones
friends,
with
I've got
the
Palestinian
weapons,
friends. Huh?
Mark,
The
they
ones
have,
with the weapons, the rockets are.
I'm
Mark,
The
sorry.
ones in control.
Mark, they had a great chance to build their own state, same as Israel did in 1948. Israel started to build its state. So the Palestinians should have done the same thing, but they failed.
That's like
I have a question for Sasha. For your benefit, Mark, Sasha, Israel pulled out of Gaza a number of years ago. Gaza agriculture was developed. What did they do with that land once Israel pulled out?
They're using it to hide the missiles, and they're bringing terrorists through tunnels into Israel.
What did they do with all the greenhouses?
I have no idea, really.
I think they destroyed all the greenhouses and they used the metal for other purposes, for projectiles and stuff.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah, most likely. I really.
I
do.
mean,
Has-
part of that is also support, and we can get into a whole conversation, and maybe that'll be, like you said, Lee, another show, because we can get into a whole conversation about imperialism, colonialism, and where the money goes, that money trail and everything. Because if the money trail is not supporting those things, then that is an issue. That is part of the problem that I've had even in
Mark,
some of the
Mark,
hold on a second,
I would
Sasha.
advise
That's
you
part of the
one
problem
thing.
I've had in some of the African American communities as well, is that if you
on
don't get
Netflix,
support,
there is a great movie, Fauda, on Netflix. There are already 3 seasons, and the 4th is coming soon. I saw all the 3. This movie is so realistic movie about interaction between Jews and Arabs in this Gaza, and not only in Gaza, in West Bank and so on. It's so realistic movie, and it doesn't portray Arabs as bad people at all. No, they're decent people, and those Arabs who live in Israel, they're part of the society. They have the same rights as Jews, except that they don't have to serve in the army. But if they want to serve, they're welcome, but they don't have to serve in the army.
and there are several documentaries. There are several.
The issue, you just mentioned the money issue, and you will see that the money are coming to terrorists, not the people who actually live there and want to
Right.
build their life. It's coming to terrorists who are using them to terrorize people of Israel and in their own people just as well.
Right.
And like I said, there are several documentaries, and we can get on this either tomorrow or definitely in a future show. But there are several documentaries that show and highlight the aspect, including some that I can show you, Sasha, about what is the true view of some of the Palestinians and some of those that are members of the PLO and some of the other organizations that are out there, and including some that weren't as radical as of the PLO. And definitely we can talk even, Dan, about some of the financing that comes from the government. And I would argue both the Democrats and the Republicans that have funded some of the things that go on in Israel.
Mark.
But they've also
Why don't
funded
you
some
tell
of
us
the things in
leader of
OPEC and things along those lines.
A great Yasser Arafat, when he passed away, and his widow got some money and lived very happily after in Switzerland. How much money the widow of Yasser Arafat got?
Like I
Do you
said, I
know
don't know that. I don't know that figure, but I also don't know how much. I don't know how much.
Fact check me on that. It's $2 billion, and we are talking about dollars of 20 years ago. Okay, Mark, I'm fine.
All right, you're fine. And like I said, we'll end the show and everything on that note. But like I said, we can bring up some other facts later. But right now, we're going to go into the whole notion of getting off, and we'll be back tomorrow with more discussions around the news. Oh, I didn't forget to mention, because Chris did want me to mention that on a lighter note, but a sad note and everything, a sports legend passed away. So I did not want to let us get out of the news without mentioning the great loss of Franco Harris. So Franco Harris did pass away yesterday, and many of y'all that know the football and the Immaculate Reception and all in that space, and of course that great Coke commercial that he did as well, will have many fond memories of him. And I know that there's even been some folks that said that depending on which way the beard is looking, that I had some similarities to Franco and all of that in terms of our looks and all in that kind of space. But definitely he was a sports legend and a true sports legend. So definitely want to give a shout out to a Super Bowl champion and a sports legend who passed away just last night and all in that line. So definitely wanted to give that shout out. And if everybody has any final thoughts about Franco before we get on out of here, then I will hear those. So Lee, you're up there in New York. Any thoughts about Franco? I know he's not exactly a New York person, and maybe Dan has some thoughts as well. Maybe not so much, Josh.
I'm going to pass. I just want to thank you for a really good show today.
Oh yeah.
Fun.
What'd you say, Dan?
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
the show is getting better and better with, with each day. That's for sure.
Oh, no doubt. Cool. Well, let's get on out of here.
Okay.
God bless y'all. Take care.